This warehouse holds over $100 million. This is the cash distribution center in Los Angeles, where armored trucks come every day, transporting this cash to and from banks. These armored trucks are guarded by armed personnel, and even the drivers are armed. However, one man watched, thought, and planned to rob this building, forming a gang of 6 people. Surprisingly, none of these 6 had any criminal records or had ever stolen anything before this heist. Imagine turning from an ordinary law-abiding person to a thief stealing tens of millions without any prior experience. Despite the meticulous planning and smart execution, it was the small plastic pieces they accidentally left behind that ultimately led to their downfall. If you want to know the secret of this piece, watch the story to the end. If one of us wants cash, we simply go to the bank and withdraw from our account. But where do banks get their money from? How does it reach them? Usually, specialized companies, either private or governmental, handle the transportation of cash. These companies use armored trucks with armed guards and drivers to deliver money to the banks. Today's story happened in Los Angeles in 1997. One of the companies specializing in money transport was called Dunbar Armored. This company had cash distribution centers in various cities. The cash would come from the central bank or the Federal Reserve, gather at these distribution centers, and then be sent to local banks via armored trucks. Dunbar was responsible for storing and distributing this money to banks. The building you see here was one of the largest cash distribution centers owned by the company. This center held over $100 million on any given day. These millions moved in and out of the distribution center daily. In fact, the amount of cash in this place was greater than any local bank. This was the city's cash hub. If you were a thief looking for a target, this center would be the perfect choice, especially since its security was lower than that of banks, because banks are public places where anyone can enter and exit, so they needed extra security. But this place is private and doesn't receive customers or visitors. Security systems and guards were present, but the security measures weren't as stringent as those in banks, even though it held more money. Let's take a quick tour of the building. From the outside, it looks like an ordinary single-story warehouse. Here is the gate where the cash-loaded trucks enter, and these are the doors for loading and unloading money. This small door is the entrance for employees. Outside, there's a surveillance camera that can rotate in all directions, but it's the only one outside. Inside, all the hallways and rooms are filled with surveillance cameras because the interior is crucial. The money only leaves the building on armored trucks, which are guarded by armed drivers. To give you a clearer picture, this is the floor plan of the building. This door is where the employees enter. This room is called the guard room, or sometimes the lunchroom, because the guards eat there. Inside this room is a smaller room called the monitoring room. This room has screens that show the camera feeds, and there's usually a guard watching these screens 24/7. However, note that there were only 4 screens, even though there were 25 cameras. This means the screens didn't show all the camera feeds at once. They cycled through them. Keep this in mind. Going back to the floor plan, this area is the money loading and unloading zone, directly overlooking the outdoor parking area. Next to this area is the vault room. Inside the vault room is the main vault, which is where the cash is stored. The vault has a very thick steel door. Outside the vault is the money preparation area, where accountants sit and prepare the cash. All money is counted and prepared in this area, whether before it goes into the vault or when it comes out to be loaded onto trucks. However, keep this floor plan in mind as we move forward. As we mentioned, the building didn't have the strongest security measures. The challenge for any thief targeting this place was that it was difficult to scout out and learn its entrances and exits. They would be unaware of the security measures in place and couldn't simply walk in to observe like you might in some banks with safety deposit boxes. This was a private facility, making it a tough target. You'll be surprised to know that the mastermind behind today's story had never stolen anything before. This was his first foray into crime. He had a clean record and had never been in trouble with the law. So how did someone like this decide to target such a challenging and unknown place as a cash distribution center? The man was one of the center's employees working as a security guard. His name was Alan Pace. Despite his clean record, Alan knew how to use weapons, guns, and radios because of his job. His duties included inspecting and maintaining the trucks that entered and exited the center daily, ensuring the locks and security systems were in perfect condition. Alan was seeing millions of dollars pass by him every day. This is where the seeds of the heist began to grow in Alan's mind. He had an ally inside the center, his girlfriend, Tamiko Carnes. She managed the security recording devices, which meant she oversaw the cameras and video feeds. Her position was incredibly useful to Alan and was likely a key factor in his decision to proceed with the plan. Tamiko knew many of the security details of the distribution center, which greatly benefited Alan. He began thinking about how to execute the heist and whom to involve because he couldn't do it alone. But while he was contemplating, Tamiko was suddenly fired from her job. The company suspected her of attempting to steal after finding some money bags placed in an isolated corner out of the camera's view. There wasn't concrete evidence, just circumstantial, but enough to get her fired. Whether she tried to steal or was just unlucky, we don't know. Anyway, after Tamiko's dismissal, Alan's relationship with the management became strained, and he felt the spotlight might turn on him next, even though he hadn't done anything wrong yet. He felt pressured to act quickly. The first step was forming a team, as he couldn't pull off the heist alone. He decided to recruit close friends. The first person he approached was his best friend, Eugene Hill. Like Alan, Eugene had no criminal record and worked as a security guard, making him familiar with weapons and security matters. Convincing Eugene was easy for Alan due to their close bond. Next, Alan needed to choose the other members carefully. He approached two more friends, Freddie McCrary, who had been a security guard and a longtime friend since they were 10 years old, and Terry Brown, whom Alan met while he working as a security guard at a nightclub before getting the job in the Dunbar Center. Alan gathered them in a parking lot and drew a chalk diagram of the distribution center on the ground, explaining his plan in detail, how they would enter, what they would do. He spoke with confidence and intelligence, showing that he had studied the situation thoroughly. Seeing Alan's enthusiasm and confidence, the group agreed to join him. With a team of 4 assembled, all trusted friends, Alan took a bold step. He brought a camera to work and started taking pictures, pretending they were just keepsakes. He photographed colleagues and accountants in the vault room and various areas of the center. His goal was to provide his team with a clear idea of the layout, the locations of the cameras, and the faces of the employees they might encounter. Although risky, Alan's insider status made it plausible. Even if someone saw him taking pictures, they wouldn't suspect anything. After gathering all this information, Alan drew a detailed floor plan and met with his team again, explaining exactly how they would execute the heist. The plan was as follows. They would use 2 vehicles. The first would be a regular sedan, and the second a small rental truck. They would park the sedan a short distance from the distribution center, then all get into the truck and drive to the center. They would enter the building using a key that Alan had, executing the heist on a Friday night, the night before the weekend. This night was ideal because it was the time when the center held the most money, and security was minimal due to the upcoming weekend. During this night, the vault door would be left open as the accountants would be counting and placing money into the vault. Due to the large volume of cash, the vault door wasn't constantly opened and closed. It was simply left open. Once inside, they would avoid the surveillance cameras. Alan knew the location and angles of every camera. There would only be 1 guard on duty that night, and Alan knew exactly when this guard took his dinner break. They would enter during this time to surprise him. After securing the guard, they would head to the vault room where the accountants and a monitor would be. The monitor had a button under the table that, if pressed, would trigger an alarm and summon the police. It was crucial to capture the monitor before he had a chance to press the button. Once they restrained all the employees, the final step was to enter the vault, take the money, and load it into their truck. They had to ensure they didn't take any newly printed money or cash in sequential serial numbers, as these would be easily traceable. Their target was only the older bills, which was a critical point of the plan. Alan would guide them on which money to take and which to leave, since he knew the place inside out. Afterward, they realized that they will need another member, so they brought in Thomas Johnson, a friend who also worked in security. Now, the team consisted of 5 security guards, including Alan and his closest friends. Every day, they reviewed the plan, studying the floor plan and the timing and movements required. They even memorized the faces of the employees to distinguish between the guard, the accountants, and the monitor. They wanted to be 100% prepared. Alan instructed them to wear all black, with masks and gloves to conceal their identities. Although they had no intention of harming anyone, they armed themselves in case of emergencies. The sight of weapons would also make the employees more compliant. To avoid detection, timing their movements with the cameras was crucial. There were 25 cameras inside the building, but only 4 screens in the monitoring room, which cycled through the camera feed every 10 seconds. Thanks to Tamiko's insider information, they knew exactly when each camera would be live on the monitors, allowing them to avoid detection. Alan trained his team professionally, calculating the speed and distance needed to cross each corridor. Every movement had to be precise. Everything was going according to plan. By September 1997, they were ready to execute the heist. Alan wanted to wait until the end of the month to ensure his team was fully prepared. However, a surprise twist occurred. Alan was suddenly fired from his job and had to return his keys immediately. In a rush, Alan made copies of the keys before handing them back to the company. This accelerated their timeline. He called his team and told them they would execute the plan the following Friday, September 12, 1997. Preparations began immediately. Alan asked Eugene, his closest friend, to rent the truck they would use, which was a small to medium-sized vehicle. Alan also needed an alibi since he was recently fired and would be a suspect if anything happened. Eugene suggested they attend a large family party with many relatives and friends. They would slip out during the party to execute the heist and then return quickly. This way, numerous witnesses could vouch for their presence at the party. We have reached the day of the operation, which is Friday, September 12, 1997. Alan and his companions gathered at Eugene's house and began to review the plan once more. When they went through the details, they realized they needed an additional person. There were 5 of them. One would stay with the truck, another would stay with the guard they were going to restrain. This left only 3, while there could be 3 to 4 employees in the vault room. Alan wanted to ensure their number was equal to or greater than the number of employees to maintain full control of the situation. This is where the 6th member, Eric Boyd, came into the team, literally 8 hours before the operation. Eric was actually Alan's brother-in-law, as he was married to Alan's sister, making him a trusted relative. With Eric, the group now had 6 members. Given the short time Eric had to get up to speed on the details, his task was to stay in the truck. At the end of the meeting, they kept going over the plan multiple times to ensure everyone understood their role and what exactly they needed to do. They agreed to call each other by numbers during the operation, numbering themselves from 1 to 6, to avoid revealing their identities. They would also have radios for communication. They made a pact that if one of them got caught, they would remain silent, and the rest would take care of their family, ensuring they lived comfortably, especially financially, until their release from prison. Time flew by, and at 10 o'clock in the evening, the 6 headed to the party, which was their alibi. They mingled and chatted with people, making sure their presence was noticed so that everyone would remember they were at the party. Then, around 11 o'clock, they started leaving the party one by one, spacing out their departures to avoid suspicion. In the end, 2 of them got into a regular sedan, and the remaining 4 got into the rented small truck. They drove together until they reached a spot close to the center. Here, they parked the small truck, and the 2 who were in the sedan joined the others in the truck. The new team member, the driver, would remain in his regular clothes. The other 5 inside the truck's cargo area changed into all black outfits, masks, and gloves, and readied their weapons. They then headed to the center. When they arrived beside the center, Alan immediately knew luck was on their side. The exterior camera was pointed at a pickup truck in the parking lot, which belonged to the on-duty supervisor. This supervisor oversaw the money movements inside the vault and the accountant's work. Alan knew this supervisor and knew he was obsessively protective of his car, often asking the guard to point the camera at it instead of the door. Since there was only one camera, this was very fortunate for them. However, Alan and his companions were already aware of the camera's schedule and could have avoided it anyway. They simply walked to the door and opened it with the key Alan had copied before returning the originals and entered. And now they faced the most difficult task, avoiding all the cameras inside, especially in the hallways. This is where the training they had been doing for the past period came into play. They knew the locations of all the cameras and the timing needed for their movements. When a camera was broadcasting to the screen, they would stay still, and when it switched, they would move immediately. These cameras had precise timing, switching the feed every certain number of seconds. They had this information because, as we mentioned before, Alan's girlfriend Tamiko was in charge of these systems before she left the job. So, referring back to the map I showed you earlier, the gang entered through this door and made their way through the hallways, avoiding the surveillance cameras until they reached the guard room. As we said, there was supposed to be only one guard on duty that night, and it was just past midnight. Alan knew that this guard always took his dinner break precisely at midnight. So the guard likely wasn't even watching the camera screens, which was an additional precaution Alan had accounted for. They indeed burst into the guard room and found the guard eating, so they quickly restrained him. This meant they didn't really need to avoid the cameras after all, since the guard was eating and not monitoring the screens. This was a smart move by Alan, and he wouldn't have been able to pull it off without knowing the guard's habits, having worked with and known them for years. After restraining the guard, they took his gun, and Alan immediately took the keys to the vault room from him. Then Alan went to the small monitoring room with the 4 screens to check the number of employees in the vault room. There were 2 accountants and the supervisor in the room at that moment. Everything was going according to plan, but no matter how much you plan, there are always unforeseen events. At that moment, another guard entered the building. This guard was one of the truck drivers, and truck drivers weren't supposed to enter the building at this time. The truck deliveries should have been finished, and all the drivers should have gone home. These truck drivers were also guards, meaning they were armed. This was an unexpected surprise. Thus, Alan and one of his companions quickly went to confront and restrain the driver. Fortunately for them, the driver did not have his weapon with him at that moment, so they were able to easily restrain him and throw him on the ground with the other guard. One of the 5 stayed behind to keep an eye on the restrained guards, while the remaining 4 moved from the guard room to the vault room. As we mentioned, Alan had taken the keys from the guard, but before they entered the vault room, Alan peered through the glass to ensure there were no surprises or additional people inside. Indeed, there were only 3 individuals, the supervisor and 2 accountants. Alan knew their entry had to be swift and decisive, with the priority being the supervisor, who had a panic button under his desk. If he managed to press it, the police would arrive immediately. As soon as Alan opened the door, they rushed in, pointing their weapons at the supervisor and ordering him to raise his hands, warning him not to even think about pressing the button. The supervisor complied immediately, not daring to risk his life. The robbers tied him up along with the accountants. They were somewhat rough with the employees. One of the accountants was forced to the ground so hard that she hurt her shoulder and cried out in pain. To console her, Alan said, "Don't worry, dear, Everything will be all right. After securing the employees, they asked the supervisor if there were any other staff members in the building. The supervisor confirmed that they were the only ones present. The gang quickly swept through the building to make sure no one else was around. Once they had complete control of the place, they moved on to the main task, stealing the money. The first thing they did was radio their driver, Eric, and open the door for him to bring the truck into the loading area. However, as Eric was backing the truck in, he hit the side of the wall, breaking one of the rear lights and causing a small piece to fall off, something the robbers didn't notice. They then entered the vault and started taking the money. The cash was in bundles, all in $20 bills. They had to avoid the newly printed bills with sequential serial numbers, as they would be easy to trace. Alan directed them to the bundles with older bills, which they put into garbage bags. They then took these bags and loaded them into the truck, quickly filling it up completely with the cash. Before leaving, they needed to eliminate any evidence. The most crucial piece of evidence was the surveillance tapes. All they had to do was take the recording devices, and they would be free of evidence because, in 1997, there was no cloud storage or Wi-Fi to save backups online. All recordings were on tapes, so if they took the tapes, all the footage would be gone. They took the entire recording device from the monitoring room with the screens. However, there was a second hidden recording device in one of the offices in the building. No other robbers would have known about this backup device. But once again, because Alan's girlfriend, Tamiko, was in charge of these systems, she knew all the secrets and had informed Alan about the second device. Indeed, Alan went to that office, found the device, and took it. The robbers took the recording devices and tapes with them, leaving no trace behind. The next step was to sabotage the door lock. Remember, they had entered using a key. To prevent the police from discovering they used a key, they damaged the lock to make it look broken, further distancing suspicion from Alan. With everything done, it was time to escape, but they faced a problem. The sheer amount of money they loaded into the truck left no room for everyone. Two of them couldn't find space to ride. Their plan was for all of them to ride in the truck and then drop Alan and Eugene off at the sedan and they parked nearby. However, their operation had been even more successful than anticipated. So what was the solution? Should they remove some of the money bags to make space for the remaining two? That seemed like the most logical solution, but Alan refused. He didn't want to leave any of their loot behind. He closed the truck door and told the four to go while he and Eugene stayed behind. But Alan had an idea. Remember the supervisor's pickup truck parked outside? Alan decided to take it. He went to the bound supervisor, took the truck keys from his pocket, and along with Eugene, drove away. All they needed was to reach their sedan, which was parked close to the building. They switched vehicles, leaving the supervisor's truck in the parking lot, thus completing their escape successfully. However, the operation wasn't over yet. The final step was to return to the party they had left, which served as their alibi. After leaving, they went to Eugene's house, stored their weapons, and changed clothes, putting back on their party attire. They then drove the truck and the sedan back to the party location, with the money still in the truck. They arrived back at the party around 1:30 a.m., about 90 minutes after they had left. Parking the truck in front of the house, they rejoined the party and mingled with the guests again. About an hour after the gang left the Dunbar Center, the employees managed to free themselves and immediately called the police. The police and the FBI arrived and began their investigation. The first thing the investigators noticed was the broken lock on the external door. However, upon closer inspection, they felt it was just a cover-up. They saw no signs of forced entry on the door itself, only the broken lock. This was a mistake by Alan and his crew, as it made the investigators suspect the robbers had a key, indicating an inside job. The second clue the investigators found was the plastic pieces from the truck's broken taillight, left behind when the driver hit the wall. These pieces didn't match any of the company's trucks, suggesting they came from the robber's truck. This was all the investigators could find. The place was otherwise clean, with no evidence left behind. As for Allen and his crew, they rented a small garage to stash the money until things calmed down and they could divide the loot at their leisure. The management of Dunbar counted the missing money and determined that the gang had stolen around $19 million. In today's money, that would be close to $30 million. At the time, this was undoubtedly the largest cash heist in American history, and likely in the world. The amount they stole was mostly in $20 bills, so the volume of cash was enormous, filling the truck quickly. Due to the size of the heist, the authorities feared that copycats might emerge, attempting similar robberies at cash distribution centers. To avoid this problem, they decided not to disclose the actual amount stolen. Instead, they told the media that more than $1 million had been stolen from the Dunbar Center without revealing the true figure. As investigators delved into the details of the case, they felt all the evidence pointed to an inside job. The robbers' knowledge of the recording devices, especially the hidden second device in one of the offices, suggested insider information. How else would they know about this device if they, or someone they knew, didn't work there? Additionally, the broken lock seemed like a cover-up for the use of a real key. The investigators interviewed everyone working at the center, about 130 people, including current employees and those who had been recently terminated. During the interviews, they administered lie detector tests, using a machine that measures heart rate. Only 2 people failed this test: Allen and his girlfriend, Tamiko. There was also an additional piece of evidence against Allen. Remember the accountant who hurt her shoulder when she was forced to the ground? Allen had said to her, "Don't worry, dear, everything will be all right." This phrase stood out during the investigation. The accountant recognized Allen's voice and manner of speaking, making her one of the witnesses against him. Now, there was some evidence against Allen. Failing the lie detector test and the accountant's testimony, the company management expected the police to arrest him. However, the investigators knew this evidence wasn't enough. There was no definitive proof to convict Allen or prove his involvement, so what they had wasn't sufficient for an arrest. Despite the investigators focusing on Allen during this period, they couldn't find conclusive evidence against him. A whole year passed with the case remaining open and no new developments. Various government agencies were involved in the case, including the Los Angeles Police Department, the FBI, and even the IRS, the federal tax authority known for being the most powerful financial institution in America. Tracking money was their specialty, but all these efforts yielded no results. In the end, they decided to offer a substantial reward of $250,000 to anyone with information leading to the arrest of the robbers. The difficulties faced by the investigators and agencies in tracking the stolen money were due to Allen's cleverness. After the heist, Allen distributed the money among his accomplices and emphasized the need for caution in spending it. The dumbest thing they could do would be to buy luxury cars, mansions, or take extravagant trips around the world. Actions that would attract attention. They had to be smart and only spend small amounts as needed, especially during the ongoing intense investigation. One of the smart moves Allen made was to open a business in the entertainment sector, which served as a front for laundering their money. This allowed them to use the stolen money more comfortably. For those unfamiliar with money laundering, it involves taking the stolen money and recording it as income from their business operations or profits, even paying taxes on it, making it appear legitimate in the eyes of the law. This is essentially how money laundering works. Even with money laundering, it had to be done gradually. They couldn't suddenly inject millions into their business. They would launder tens of thousands each month and could eventually pull out $100,000 or $200,000, but not millions. Moving millions at once would draw attention. The process was slow, but the key was safety. Due to this caution, the gang remained under the radar for a full 2 years. 2 years passed, and the investigators had no way to catch them. Allen and his associates felt they had evaded the authorities for good. But unfortunately, one of them let his guard down and brought disaster upon them all. That person was Eugene, Alan's closest friend and the first to join the team. After all this time, Eugene felt they had gotten away with it. Eugene took $100,000 in cash from their loot and went to a real estate office to buy land as an investment. The money was still bundled with Dunbar's straps, which was a remarkably foolish mistake. Eugene didn't expect the real estate agent to be suspicious of the money. He thought the whole thing had blown over after 2 years. However, the agent's alarm bells went off immediately upon seeing the cash, but he didn't show his suspicion to Eugene. He knew about the $250,000 reward for information leading to the capture of the robbers. The real estate agent had Eugene sign the purchase papers and completed the transaction without raising any suspicions. After Eugene left, the agent called the police. Investigators, along with employees from Dunbar, came to examine the money. After inspecting it, they confirmed that the straps on the money were indeed from the day of the heist, as they had dates stamped on them in small print, September 11 and 12, 1997, the exact days of the robbery. With their attention now focused on Eugene, investigators began looking into his connections, friends, and family. They quickly discovered his association with Alan, whom they had already suspected. This gave them a small list of suspects. They also noticed that Eugene had been writing checks from his sister's bank account, despite her not having enough income to support such transactions. This was additional evidence of money laundering. The critical piece of evidence was the red plastic fragment that broke off the truck light during the heist. Investigators determined it came from a rented truck and identified the make and model. They gathered rental records from all rental companies in the area that rented out such trucks. It took some time, but they eventually found Eugene's name in the rental records. He had rented the truck on September 12, the day of the heist, and returned it on September 13, the day after. With clear and conclusive evidence against Eugene, the investigators went to his house, arrested him, and took him to the station for questioning. Despite the gang's agreement that if anyone got caught, they would stay silent and the others would take care of their family, reality was different under the pressure of interrogation. The investigators told Eugene that if he didn't confess and reveal details of the operation and his accomplices, his sister would be implicated because of the checks he had written from her account. She would be accused of aiding in money laundering and theft, which was a serious charge. Faced with a tough choice, Eugene ultimately chose family over friends. He confessed everything, detailing his role in the heist and exposing the identities of all his accomplices. The investigation continued for several months, and during this time, all 6 members of the gang were arrested. Eventually, they were all tried for theft and money laundering. Alan's associates turned on him, pointing fingers and testifying in court that he was the mastermind behind the operation and the one who convinced them to join him. As the leader and planner of the heist, Alan received the harshest sentence, 24 years in prison. His accomplices received much lighter sentences, ranging from 10 to 12 years. Alan's biggest regret was involving his friend Eugene. Eugene was his closest friend and the first person he brought into the operation. Yet, in the end, his dearest friend turned out to be the most naive member of the team. His foolish mistake of taking the money to the real estate office was what brought them down. But there was a silver lining for them. The FBI managed to recover only $7 million of the $19 million that was stolen. This meant that $12 million remained unaccounted for. All the gang members served their sentences and were eventually released from prison. The last member was supposed to be released just last year. The remaining $12 million that the FBI couldn't find likely still belonged to them. Despite the many years they spent in prison, they came out knowing they were still millionaires. And with that, we've reached the end of our story.